Welcome to Case Study Time with Professor Hoffman. We are going to discuss a case that kind of centers around malpractice, since that was the topic for conversation today. I'm going to change a little bit of the information just to kind of protect the confidentiality of the parties involved, but this is based on a scenario that I encountered during my supervision when I was a supervisor. So it occurred at the community mental health agency that I worked at, where I was responsible for supervising case managers and therapists while they provided outpatient mental health services to clients who were authorized by our community mental health partner. So they had been identified as having a severe and persistent mental illness, and so a very vulnerable population, the individuals who really needed good support, and also had a lot of barriers to accessing the support. So part of our case manager's duties was to make sure that the clients are being connected with the services that they needed to promote positive mental well-being, and also to just kind of promote overall stability in the community. So that could look very different for each client. Some clients might need very hands-on services, so making sure that they were getting rides to their appointments, that they were maintaining their housing, maintaining their food stamps, maintaining their insurance benefits. That might require weekly visits. Some clients were pretty stable. They just continued to receive services kind of based on insurance and based on the severity and the persistence of their mental illness. They were pretty stable in their symptomology, but often that was due to the supports that were in place. So they might need to be seen a little bit less frequently. So it kind of just varied, obviously case-to-case client, but we did have obligations to our funding source, which was community mental health, that we had to see our clients at minimum once a month to have documentation to show that we were keeping eyes on in the community. There have been situations, so essentially with that, we were contractually obligated to see our clients. And if we weren't able to see our clients, we had to record the due diligence that we did in their chart to say, hey, we attempted to reach out to them via phone, we sent letters, they've missed their appointments. Sometimes that would result in us doing community visits. And so although we were an outpatient agency with the intent to be seen in the office, there are some cases where we would go out and do home visits, whether that was due to transportation barriers, resource barriers, engagement barriers. They just weren't overly motivated, and so in order to meet our end of the contractual obligations, we would have to go out and try to find them. So it wasn't uncommon to do occasional home visits out in the community. And so with that comes a level of integrity and responsibility. If you're doing home visits, you have to make sure that you're actually going there and doing the visits, billing the time that you're saying that you're billing, obviously all these things being above reproach because your clients were depending on you to do service, and as well as just overall integrity of the billing, and kind of when we bill insurance, if we weren't there doing what we were saying we were doing, then that's fraud, essentially. So we had a call from a concerned client saying, hey, it's been a couple months since I've seen my case manager, and I really need to work on getting filling out an application for reduced fare for bus tickets. Is there any way my case manager can come out and see us? So this call had gone to myself as a supervisor, because they were having difficulty reaching their case manager, and so that kind of was a natural chain of command. They would come to the supervisor. So I was like, sure. Let me go in. I looked up to see who the case manager was, and then in their electronic health record, we could see a history of all of their appointments. And so I was like, well, hey, it looks like so-and-so was out to see you just a few weeks ago on this date. And I went in the chart, and it had this whole documented encounter, and I was like, can you tell me what's going on? And he's like, no, they didn't come that day. I was like, okay, well, this is what it said that you guys discussed and everything. And, oh, nope, I never saw her that day. And I was like, okay, well, why don't I go ahead, because it doesn't look like you have any upcoming appointments, so why don't I schedule you one, and I will let them know that this is what you want to work on. And so we scheduled an appointment, called it good. Well, that was a little bit odd, only because there was some discrepancies now. We had a client reporting one thing. I haven't seen my case manager. I need help with this. I don't recall her ever coming. And then you have a case manager who says, I saw this person on this date from this time to this time. Here's what we discussed. Here was their symptoms. Here's the follow-up plan. And so it isn't necessarily atypical sometimes for clients, depending on the severity of their symptomology, to forget things and not necessarily accusing the case manager of doing X, Y, or Z, but sometimes that can just be the nature of the population that we treated, that there was some lapses in memory, maybe their symptoms were higher at the time and they just couldn't recall, and there was no ill intent behind it. Now, sometimes symptomology of our clients can also manifest into sabotaging their provider because they didn't like the services they received, they didn't like the answer, they wanted something they didn't receive, or it just could be a manifestation of some psychosis and paranoia. So we always want to make sure that we would take any concerns or complaints from clients at face value, but also keep that clinical assessment in mind of like, we need to gather all of the facts. And so we went and talked to the case manager. She's like, oh no, I saw them that day. There was no concerns or red flags. However, a week or so passed, we get a call from another client saying, hey, I really can't get a hold of my case manager. Can you please let her know I want to set up an appointment? Sure. Who's your case manager? Same case manager. Went to the chart. I said, oh, hey, it looks like she came and visited you at your home on this date. Can you tell me kind of what happened on that day? They're like, no, she never came and visited me on that day. And I was like, oh, okay, that's fine. I'll schedule an appointment, let her know to come see you, and just kind of whatever. So again, now here's 2 instances in a row with the same case manager with the same complaint, different clients, but same scenario. So this then kind of raised a concern that there might be some sort of issues going on. So this kind of led, how we addressed it then was to alert HR and corporate compliance and saying, hey, there's some concerns with this employee. Here's what they are. How should we proceed? So again, doing kind of that supervision consultation piece. Now, granted, it was with we weren't consulting with a supervisor. We were consulting with HR and corporate compliance, but that is appropriate within Barsky's model, is you want to involve the appropriate people, and those at the time were the appropriate people. So the guidance that we were given was to pull random days. Again, so this was corporate compliance giving us days to look at, saying, hey, look at these days, look at the appointment time, see if they were consistent. What we had to start doing was looking at drive times between appointments. Did they have enough time to get to point A to point B and then stay the time that they indicated that they would stay, and then make it to their next appointment? So this was done so it wasn't dependent on client reports, because again, like I mentioned, sometimes you have to use your clinical discernment to know the facts. And so we did kind of an audit of this case manager schedule, looking to see if could they have done what they said they'd done during this amount of time. And it began to become evident that the times that were billed, it was not physically possible for the individual to have driven from point A to point B in the time frame between appointments, given the distance between the housing and those things. So there was now some evidence to indicate that there was fraudulent billing going on, that it was not possible for those services to be done unless you got a broomstick and flew, or could teleport. Is that the word? Teleport. I don't know. So now we have a case of fraudulent billing, and so we had to address it with the case manager, and also then we have to figure out, do we need to report this then to our billers? Because if they find out secondhand that this was occurring and that we didn't report it, are we then liable as well? But then that opens a can of worms if this person was not being fully doing what they were supposed to be doing? Was that because there was poor supervision? Was there something else going on? Do we need to investigate others? So this could potentially open up a can of worms. And so then we had to figure out how to address this. Do you just address the employee? Do you address the bigger party? We ended up addressing it with the employee, and it ended up turning into a fireable offense because of X, Y, and Z that occurred and the client's ownership of it or lack of ownership. It resulted in termination of the employee. So here is an example of malpractice. Now we had an employee, our services now fall under malpractice. And so they know there has to be 4 elements of malpractice, or those 4 elements from the lecture that have to be evident to demonstrate malpractice. And they are, I'm not going to tell you what they are because that's going to be in the activity accompanying this case study. But there was enough to show that this individual did engage in malpractice, and then it resulted in her firing and termination. We had to file a report with the licensing because it was unethical behavior, it was negligence, carelessness, just not good practice. And so that occurred. It never did go to civil court. None of the individuals and clients who were impacted by this were motivated to do it. So there was nothing that kind of ended at the licensing piece, but there was consequences of loss of license and sanctions and fines, and then needing to do X, Y, and Z before they were able to regain licensure status. And so moral of the story is don't do it. Be ethical and above reproach. If you make a mistake in your time and billing, that can happen. You might have believed that you saw a client from this time to this time and an error wrote that down, but take ownership of it if you are in error. So there's that. Hopefully none of you ever have to navigate this, but an example where it's not the sensational story of a provider kidnapping their clients or holding them hostage or stealing their money, but it is an example of an individual's choice, how it then can impact clients' satisfaction and possible safety and stability in the community.